like that about the community forest gardening. You're a good narrator and storyteller. So I did like the walk through the virtual forest and all the sights and sounds. It's really good to imagine that space, and I really hope that more spaces and more gardens get converted from lawn to forest. What a wonderful thought! So I really like that talk. Thank you so much. So yeah, I mean, it would have been nice to follow Julie, because I was thinking that maybe I could, talk a little bit also about the indigenous aspect of communication between trees and humans. But I might just throw it in anyway, just because it's something that I've dedicated my life to, I'm working on, and got some projects coming on. So that might be an interesting thing to introduce as well. But yeah, so I'd just like to start today to talk about diversity and in UK farming and in volunteering on farms. So for those who don't know very much about the history of UK agriculture or about volunteering on farms, so talking about past the Middle Ages in the UK and in Europe, to be honest, because this is a very UK specific thing. There used to be a concept of common land, and people did communal farming, and they had common access to a lot of land, and that was built into the legal system of common law. So what happened then is feudalism then took hold by the 17th, 18th century, and a lot of these communities were then pushed out by landlords in a process which still affects the shape of the countryside that we see in the country today. So it was a process called enclosure, and what this basically did was build artificial boundaries and hedges around formerly open access land, and this cut off a lot of communities from what was otherwise just open access farming. I guess people were doing community forest gardening without knowing that that's what it was called. So it was just a natural way of life, really, for people to access all these things just naturally growing along the peripheries, grazing their sheep, and just lots of perennials, lots of plants just growing there for the community to take free of cost, don't have to do anything. But then you got enclosure coming in, you got landlords who wanted to lease that land out for an increasingly grain-based diet. But also what happened with this is that, self-sufficiency became degraded, and, to work all this land was a very, hard, labor-intensive process. And this has been going on for quite some time. If we look at the history of agriculture and grain-based diets in the Western world in particular, but it's really intensified that process and the need for farm labor, and this, was the beginning really of the modern day, what we imagine to be slavery in agriculture. So Irish slaves were typically employed, although considered, others considered to be of less intelligence from other parts, southern Europe, from parts of the Middle East, from Africa. African slaves did exist here, long before they were exported out to, the Americas. But that did happen as well, of course, as we, should be aware of and reminded of with Black Lives Matter. So moving on from that period, what really happened then towards the Victorian era in the 19th century was with heavy industrialization. A lot of people were then lost all the, all their agricultural jobs, out working in the fields, whether that was seasonal, whether that was, in terms of their full-time work. And what this did was increase the amount of exploitation in terms of migrant labor. coming into to the UK, and that's still unfortunately something that we see today. With even during COVID, they tried their best to advertise, get UK public onto farms, and raise that spirit of Dunkirk. But unfortunately, they had to then fly in thousands of people from Eastern Europe to pick all the fruit and veg that ends up in the big supermarkets. And there's a lot of exploitation involved in that. And but it's always been justified, really, by big farmers. And there are big farmers, because the legacy of all of this enclosure was to put the land into the hands of the few. So something like 1% of people own 50% of all agricultural land in this country, in the UK. And a majority of that is in the landed gentry, who've inherited this land back from then, the time of enclosure. So they were given titles, they were given lands, which used to be common land, but it was quite taken away from people who were doing community forest gardening and grazing their animals. So that was taken away. At the same time as well, there's been a lot of slavery involved in the system, just to keep it going. And the legacy of that has lived on now in farm volunteering. So slavery was always justified as being a fair exchange, that we're educating, we're offering an opportunity, we're offering some board and lodging in exchange for hard labor. And it was always seen to be a very fair exchange. And that for people on the ground, it was hardly anything as such. It was indentured labor, or what would now be called modern day slavery. So in the 60s and early 70s, the woofing movement started then in the UK and has now taken hold in many countries. So what that is, if you're not aware, is, well, it's gone through a number of name changes. It used to be called working weekends on organic farms. And then they kind of changed that to willing workers on organic farms, which name is quite telling. And now they've kind of, snazzed that up to be worldwide opportunity. And I think they're going through another brand change now, which I'll come to. So what this is that it's basically a database. It's a not-for-profit. They connect people with who want experience and work on organic farms to farm hosts who want such people to come and work for free in exchange for food and lodging, and it seems to be a very fair exchange. But in reality, you'll find that it's a very labor-intensive process. They do take quite a lot from you, and the downside of this, which most people may not realize, is that this system is very closed off to a lot of people who may not be, in that position of privilege to be able to say, I can just spend an entire summer, on an organic farm without having, family to feed, without having mortgage to pay, without having to worry about extended family, children to take care of, and many of these things which are much more prevalent in communities within people of color. So black and ethnic minority communities tend to have more caring responsibilities, to have lower socioeconomic status, to have greater, barriers to in accessing the countryside, based on being located in big cities. So there is discrimination really built into this system of what is now, technically called a system of white privilege. That people are brought up in a system where they take things for granted, that, these opportunities are easily available. You can take the gap year, you can spend time without having to worry, but other people do, and for them it's not really a quote unquote fair exchange. And for a lot of people as well, there is a reminder of colonialism, there's a reminder of slavery, and that's still within living memory. So the Windrush generation, who moved here, there's a lot of people who still have memories of their parents being indentured labor in the Caribbean, because even though slavery was outlawed, it took several generations for it to actually fully come to an end. Um, Landlords were allowed to keep so many generations of slaves under a different name. So it's still there in living memory, and for a lot of people, volunteering is something on a farm, for board and lodging, paying for your own waiver, is not only just inaccessible, but it's also deeply traumatic to think about. Um, the effects of colonization and slavery go through multiple generations. It's embedded gets embedded into our genetic DNA. So these are very difficult issues to work through, and there is of course discrimination once people actually manage to jump through these hoops to get onto farm, and it what this discrimination does is put a lot of communities off who would otherwise naturally be inclined to want to be out there. And there's a lot of people, there's a lot of religious communities, whether you've got Hindus or Sikhs or others, who have deep links to being one with nature and farming and agriculture, and whose ancestors would have been very strongly associated with growing food, who would be a great resource to be able to be out there learning the skills that they need. And so the question does arise as to what can be done about this. So I've been having a conversation with some of the trustees over at Group UK, and they're interested in having a conversation about how to move forward. Of course, there's the coronavirus crisis right now, which is taking up their time. But there's a lot of things which can be done. And this really ties in with the Black Lives Matter movement, thinking about decolonizing all aspects of our lives. So it's not just how do you make something more accessible, but recognizing the roots of slavery, the roots of colonization in the system, in a systematic way. So this is very much a systemic discrimination, because the system is built into a position of white privilege that, okay, if you can afford to do this, take the gap year, take the month off, then you're okay with being able to spend that time out there, and acknowledging the fact that this rationale of a fair equity of labor, and hard labor at that, in exchange for often sleeping in a tent, is a very much fair exchange. Well, you'll find that in the UK, most people who tend to benefit then from this are of a certain race and class group, and that then sets into stone certain ways of the way that the land is looked at. So you'll find that the more diversity that you have in growing food, there's a lot more knowledge shared about ways of growing food. So when you've got people of color being involved, they bring to the table a lot more diverse knowledge of growing things and different ways of imagining the landscape, which thankfully now is being brought back with the likes of forest gardening. But there's many other ways of that people look at the land, not just in terms of the resource that it can provide as a machine, but also as a living entity. So I'm a Sikh. My people see the air, the water, and Mother Earth as great sentient living entities, and we acknowledge this in all our prayers every day. And when we're on the land, it's not just, yes, it's providing me with food and medicine, but it's also that it's the source of life. And we know that. We all say that, we're built up of all these atoms. We are the food we eat. But it is also much deeper than that. We see, we say, Pavan Guru, so we say that the wind, the air is my spiritual guide, and the water is my father, and mother is my earth, the earth is my mother. And we literally believe that when the wind is blowing in our face, we are receiving messages. And when we are with the trees, they are downloading information. They are maintaining us. So we'll spend time outdoors, and it's a magical experience. That's something that when a diverse group of people are out there on the farm, then there is that exchange of information which is beneficial, and that's really, I think, one of the things that should be a motivating factor for people to consider. That it's not just, yes, we've got this whole untapped potential group of workers who can join the workforce, but also provide different perspectives, different ways of looking at the land, different ways of imagining the landscape. And just want to throw out there that, there's a great webinar coming up soon in September. Maybe I'll just send out a link on chat so that everyone can have that. So you can find it on the Permaculture event site. It's on the 9th of September at 7 p.m. And it's led by Lee Penniman, who is a half African, half Jewish farmer, lives in New York State, and she's going to be talking about some of these issues, about imagining how, what she calls anti-racism in farming, how to bring that to the UK, because there's been a lot of that work in the US. She's been doing it for 20 years, so I strongly recommend people look at this. And it's a paid webinar. It's about £5 a pop, but it raises funds for a good cause. So there's a lot of people working towards this in the US. I work in Canada. There's a lot of people working with indigenous groups there as well in this area. There is less so in the UK, but I think there's so much potential. And with greater awareness, something needs to give. And it's not just about whooping. It's about, opening up opportunities for diverse groups to realize that, yes, this is an opportunity that they can be involved in at a community level, at an individual level. Get out there to the countryside, get out to the open spaces. It's about, a very small minority of PAME people, actual regular access from country. And there's so much potential there. And there's much scope to be offered.
Can I say something? So,
go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, I think Jo may have a question as well. She's raised.
Yeah.
She's put something in the chat, but I just wanted to say while Jo's collecting her thoughts, what I've noticed is I obviously, I come from a BAME background, and I work a lot with different people of, from this community, and it's incredible how many people feel. I asked them, when was the last time you went to a forest? And how many people say they've never been to a forest? What? It's amazing, especially from the Afro-Caribbean community, how many of them really feel that the forest is not their place. It's not a place that they are even, almost it comes across as if they feel like they're not allowed to go to a forest. And I'm like, what do you mean? It's just a free space. It's what? But it's so deeply ingrained.
That's right.
I know. Okay, so as a youth growing up, I grew up here in East London in a part which was, Dagenham, which back in the 70s, 80s was a place which was full of skinheads. It's where the skinheads went from neo-Nazi from very much being pro-black and white into neo-Nazi. And so it was a very, very, very violent place. And for sure, there were certain places you knew you could not go. You were absolutely afraid. Certain parks and things which, you knew you were vulnerable to attack if you went there. So, and I'm wondering now in this day and age, what is stopping people from just going to a forest? So I don't know if you want to answer that, but I think maybe Joe also maybe has some questions. I don't know if you want to answer into that first.
I do. Sorry.
Go
I'm cooking me dinner at the same time, so I apologise. So I've spent my day talking about sort of diversity of panels on when you go to conferences. And my question is nothing to do with that at all. I live right on the edge of Epping Forest. Very rarely do I see anybody walking in the forest who is black or ethnic minority. And if you do, it's unusual. I took a bunch of children from Newham to the forest and all of their teachers, and all of the teachers were Asian or black. None of them had ever been to the forest before. It's right on their doorstep. They'd never been there. What? I don't understand. I'm coming from a position that I don't understand what stops people going and how, as a forest school leader, I can encourage them to come, because I'm coming from, I don't understand it really. I need some information and some pointers from you really to help me out.
Well, great questions. I think both what you've mentioned and what Rakesh has mentioned is it's something which is very deeply ingrained in the social hierarchy and the racial hierarchy of the Western world in general. And white privilege, I'll break that down. There's a great woman on YouTube, and she's called Robin DiAngelo. And she's got a book out now called Deconstructing White Privilege. And what she really talks about is how at a very deep level people are brought up right from a very early age believing, they're not necessarily directly told this, but through their experience as a community group, they are very deeply the message becomes very deeply ingrained that there are certain things which are off limits, that it's not that is a white thing to do, that this is something which is not accessible to a certain group of people. And within the BAME in this, I would include people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds as well, but let's say inner city, working class, white people as well. So, unless and until you come from that background and have experienced barriers in life, it becomes very difficult from somebody outside of that group to imagine why these barriers exist in the first place. So, one of the things that a lot of my Afro-Caribbean friends, when they go back to Jamaica, they head straight to the hills, and they spend time in the forests. And I got friends from Asia, all over the Southeast Asia, and they head straight out into the hills, right into the wildlife. But when it's back in the UK, it's yes, the forest. There is this mental image which is portrayed. Not only that, you've got this white aristocratic dog walking, very posh speaking kind of figure who has access, who owns the countryside. And it's not, as I said, it's only about BAME background as well, but it's something which is deeply ingrained into the psyche of people who are of color, but also people who are not of color. So it is unfortunate that there is discrimination, there is racism, and as long as that persists in the countryside, now I look different. I look very different from just the ordinary suited and booted person. When I go out into the countryside, I sound a particular way that puts people at ease. But not everybody does sound that way. And these regional accents can also be a barrier, but ultimately it's the system of systemic discrimination is built into society. And the way to challenge that is to understand what white privilege means, and to understand how to break down these barriers, one needs to actually reach out and to be able to invite, to be able to say that, okay, it is now not acceptable anymore in the 21st century in a modern country for there to be these barriers, and to also acknowledge that it's not just a mental barrier for these people who are not accessing the countryside or being on a panel for that matter. There are similar reasons over there as well, very often being self-selecting. But when it comes to the countryside and accessing that, people need to be given opportunities, to be made to feel that this is something that they are not only, entitled to, but something that should be part of their life for all the same reasons as to why everyone who regularly accesses these spaces do know, for their health, for socializing, for enjoying the great beauty of the outdoors, and we have plenty of that in this country.
What I find interesting is the etymology of the word forest. So it comes from the French, which, okay, I don't know if Picaccini's still here, but it comes from the word forêt, which apparently means the king's hunting ground. So the etymology as it came in to English was that the forest, it's not what we now in modern day English think of as a forest. When we think of a forest, we think of just a wild space with trees where possibly maybe there's wild deer running around and that is possibly managed by someone. But in the old days it used to be the etymology of the word is it comes from the king's hunting ground. So anyone caught doing something like, for example, killing an animal, i.e. On the king's hunting ground, it was so it was dangerous to be on the king's hunting ground. Poachers, the term poacher also comes from there, from taking something that belongs to the king. And so I'm wondering whether there's also some energetic, just in the name itself, an unspoken, as you say, an unspoken understanding that that place is just, it's for the privileged.
Yes.
It's for the privileged. And the middle classes, the middle classes, they are the privileged, or those above them. They're the landowners, but they allow the middle classes to have access to that. Like the white middle classes, yes, you have access. The rest,
that's really interesting, Rakesh. I think that's really interesting because I live like on the edge of East London, and I've grown up with Epping Forest on our doorstep. But when I go on holiday somewhere else, quite often there is a real anxiety if we go for a walk about whether or not we're allowed to walk there or not. And I don't know if the people that I'm walking with have that anxiety, but that is an anxiety that I have, that actually, are we allowed to walk here? Does this land belong to somebody? Are we going to get in trouble? We're going to get shot at? So I guess it's kind of perhaps because I know the forest, I know that isn't the case, but in other parts of the country, I don't know the place. I'm wondering if perhaps that's the same sort of really sick in your stomach worry feeling that actually you're going somewhere you're not meant to be.
Mm-hmm. Joe, I've just sent you a message. Sorry, I just want to tell you because I might get logged out by the looks of things before session ends. Are we finishing at 7? Sorry, or 7:30?
7:30, and there's 2 more people are going to speak. So if maybe we can wrap this up in the next 4 minutes, that would be
okay.
Incredible.
No, I just wanted to say I've just sent you a message because I don't think I will be able to. I'll be here at the end of the session. So if you just respond to my message, and then we could talk later maybe.
Is that to me personally? You mean?
No, I've sent it to Jo,
Jo,
Rakesh,
okay.
because she's
Wonderful.
asked a specific question, so I thought maybe she
Lovely.
wanted to talk. Okay. All
Okay.
right, that's yeah.
Yeah, so
So I think it's a
think
really sorry. It's just I think it's just a really heavy subject. It's a really interesting point, but I think there's a lot more to it than we could maybe talk about here. So anyway, yeah, that's sorry, Preetam. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Thank
No, I
you,
was just saying that, you know, that is a very relevant point. Rakesh invited me to just do an impromptu and just introduce this as food for thought. There's a lot more in this thing, you know. I'm going to send out the webinar link, and they're going to be talking about some of these issues in some detail as well. And so, you know, there's a movement called Lions, which is, you know, opening up access to people of color, opening up the countryside. So there are organizations that are working towards this, and you know, that there are movements which are trying to bring, you know, agriculture and connect food and all of that, you know, back to cultures which are very deeply connected to that inherently. So I think there's a lot going on. It is a big topic. It is a heavy topic, but it's something I think we need to reflect on. Thank you for the link, Rakesh. That's the one. So I recommend everyone, you know, at least look at the page and maybe sign up if you've got the time. And so thank you as well, Rakesh, for, you know, an opportunity to just introduce this. And, you know, I'm quite happy then to pick up on maybe some aspects of this in the future, to update on what's been happening with WOOF and what's been happening with some of these black movements to get people, to connect people with the land. And so many questions. Yes, there is that, you know, there is that feeling. In Canada, most of the land is privately owned. It's not like the UK where you have, you know, public rights of way. Nothing like in Scotland with right to roam. And wherever you go, there are these big signs saying, beware, you can be shot, and people are regularly shot at by angry farmers. And you do get that sick feeling in the stomach when you're wondering, you know, am I going to be shot here? Am I meant to be here? Will I get arrested? Kind of thing. That does happen. I do get a lot of that feedback from my peers that, you know, they feel uncomfortable, that they're in a place they're not meant to be, and, you know, that, you know, there's something illegal about this. So I think really there needs to be a very, you know, systemic change, but that really comes from sharing and talking, and, you know, bringing people in, and breaking down these barriers is really a very much social thing. So it's not just about, okay, why don't you do this, but why don't you come along with me, and we'll organize a group walk. And so it's about motivating, it's about empowerment as well.
Beautiful, amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rakesh.
Really,
so I'll drop off the call soon. I'm in my tent because it's raining.
I thought so. It's pretty dark here as well, so I can imagine it's raining there. Wonderful, thank you so much. Really, yeah, very happy that you've started this conversation, and hopefully more people can start thinking about this, and yeah, hopefully people will start, yeah, seeing what is it we can do to change that around. I know that me personally, I've never really fitted into the system, and I've always done things that I always had this attitude that there's a difference between doing things that are illegal and things that are immoral, and I'm happy to do illegal things as long as they're moral. And so if someone tells me I can't go there because of, you know, some perceived idea, I'm still going to do it because I can see it's the right thing to do. So yes, I've never had this fear of going to forests. And I guess also because I never really grew up in an Asian community. I grew up in a really mixed community. You know, plenty of Irish, plenty of, you know, enough Indians, enough Pakistanis, West Indians, Africans, English, Jewish, really very, 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 very mixed. I picked out little bits of lots of different cultures. And so for me, I was never afraid to go to the forest. But I am still really deeply shocked when I hear people say that they don't feel that a forest is a place for them. So yeah, so let's start thinking why is that? Beautiful, wonderful conversation. Thank you so much.